advanced topics bi'idhnillahi ta'ala. So where do we begin when teaching Arabic grammar? After considerable experience in teaching, I've decided that the most suitable area in which we begin our lessons concerns what many students and learners of Arabic grammar find the most difficult concept. And that is that a noun in Arabic, or an ismun, it can be written or spoken with an ending one of three. So there can be three possible endings whether a noun is written or spoken. And that is probably the most difficult concept that the student has to understand in order to master the Arabic language. But I believe that once you've mastered that particular area, then inshallah what remains becomes much easier to absorb. So to begin, therefore, as I mentioned, we are going to begin with an ismun, or a noun. And Arabic, in general, the language, it comprises of three parts. An ismun, a noun, a fi'lun, a verb, and a harfun, a letter. But the other two we'll discuss shortly. So to begin, therefore, an ismun. As I mentioned, every ismun in Arabic must have an ending. So if we write, for example, on the board, this word, kitab. As I said, kitab itself is incomplete until it takes an ending. So, in most instances, or rather the default instance, for an ismun that you will see either written or spoken will be what we call tanween dammin. And that is a tanween, which is two markings, and here it comprises of two markings which are dhammas. So, the first principle that we need to understand is that any ismun in Arabic, whether it be written or spoken, then it will take an ending that will comprise of a particular vowel or two vowels, and in its default state, when left alone, that particular word will take a dhamma, or rather two, at the end. So it will be pronounced kitabun. Now, ordinarily in Arabic speech, if the word is going to be stopped, i.e. when you speak, you are going to stop at that particular word. So for example, if I said hada kitab, then because I'm going to stop at kitab, the tanween would not be pronounced. We will not pronounce tanween or dammin, and it would be pronounced with the sukoon that will be explained shortly, and we will say hada kitab. But for the purpose of these lessons, what we're going to do is always pronounce the ending. And the benefit of that is so that we understand that we are pronouncing the correct ending at the word of the word and the reason for it being in that ending. And that's important because the essence of Arabic grammar, it concerns how the words end. So this word, kitabun, whether the dhammah is written or not, when you see that word by itself alone, not acted upon, then that word will have two dhammas on the end, kitabun, a book. And the two dhammas on the end, that's what gives in Arabic the meaning of something being a. So there's no individual letter in Arabic for a. Rather, it's the ending that expresses the meaning of something being a or something being indefinite. So if I say kitabun, then that is a book. It could be any book, not any specific book, but rather it's indefinite. And that ending, as we said, is the default state. Now, as we mentioned at the beginning, we know that in Arabic, an ismun can take one of three possible endings. So the second possible ending for our word kitab will be kitaban. Now, as you can see here, I have written what we call a fatha, or two on top of the letter ba here, and then there's an alif, but that's not pronounced. That's only for the purpose of writing. So the word itself is kitaban. So as you can see, the vowel marking on the end has changed from a dhamma to a fatha. It's still two, so we still refer to it as tanweenu fathin, but nevertheless it is what we call a fatha on the end. And that also means a book. And it's important to remember that just as kitabun means a book, kitaban also means a book. And we'll explain why it's now changed its form at the end shortly. So that is the second possible way in which kitab or kitabun can be written. The third possibility is if we write it with what we call a kasrah, or in this instance two, and it's called tanweenu kasrin, at the bottom of the letter ba. So now the vowel has changed from a dhamma to a fatha to a kasrah. The word becomes kitabin, and the meaning is still a book. And it's important to remember that the meaning of the word itself has not changed, rather it's the ending. And the ending has changed in this instance and in this from its default state from kitabun. So to reinforce that, if we write, for example, on the board, the word for a pen in Arabic, and we don't write the ending, what we know from what we've already explained is that qalam, being an ismun, a simple noun in the Arabic language, it must take an ending. And the ending that it takes, it being in its default state, is that it will take tanweenu dammin, or two dhammas at the end. So we will write qalamun, and now it's written correctly or completely, and the word is a pen. But it's important to remember, as I said earlier, that whether the ending is written or not, we would still pronounce it as qalamun if we were going to pronounce or read another word after it. But as I said, if you stop at the word, it's pronounced with a sukoon and it becomes qalam. But the purpose of these lessons, we are going to always write the ending, and we will always pronounce the ending in order that we understand what it is and why it is in that state. So qalamun means a pen. Now, we have three different possibilities of the word kitab. It can be kitabun, kitaban, and kitabin. All of these three different states, they will be in that state for a reason. Kitabun is its default state. So the reason why it is pronounced kitabun and indeed written kitabun is because that ismun is left alone, meaning there is nothing acting upon it. There is nothing before it that will change it. It's simply by itself, and therefore it will be in its default state of kitabun. In this instance, we have kitaban. As you can see, it's changed. And because it's changed, and whenever we do this, we should ask ourselves the question, why is it changed? So why have I written kitaban in this fashion? Of course, I did it in order to illustrate that it can take a fatha on the end. But if I was to write it ordinarily on the board or speak it kitaban, then we need to ask ourselves the question, why has it changed from its default state? Now, amongst the most common reasons why an ismun, a noun, changes from its default state to having tanween fathin on the end is because it has been acted upon by a verb. In this instance, kataba. Kataba means he wrote. What did he write? Kitaban. He wrote a book. So the complete sentence, kataba kitaban, is he wrote a book. Now, because kitab here is the object of what he wrote, it must change its ending from a dhamma to a fatha. And the meaning now is he wrote a book. So, to repeat therefore, the word has now changed from kitabun to kitaban because it's the object of a verb, kataba. So it's moved from its default state. And kataba is amongst the three-letter verbs that we'll discuss in later on in greater detail. But also, whenever you see an ismun, a noun, in that state, then from amongst the most common reasons is because it's been acted upon by a verb. The third writing of kitab, which is kitabin, as you can see, if we introduce fi, which is a harfu jar, which in English is a preposition, if we introduce fi before kitab, it becomes fi kitabin. So we've changed from kitabun to kitabin because of the presence of fi. And again, amongst the most common reasons for an ismun changing into this state is that it's been preceded, or what comes before is a harfu jar, a preposition such as fi, which means in. So we have three possible writings of the word kitab. We have kitabun, which is a default state. We have kitaban, which is when it has been acted upon by a verb. And we have kitabin, when it's been preceded by a preposition such as fi. Now, what we are going to do is mention the particular name for each of these three states that the grammarians have applied to them. So the first state, the word being kitabun, in Arabic, that is referred to as, that is referred to as marfu'un. Marfu'un. So whenever you see an ismun such as kitabun, then you should remember that the state that the word is in is called marfu'un. And marfu'un in Arabic, it means raised. And we'll come back to that point shortly. So the first state with the dhamma is called marfu'un. The second state with the fatha is referred to as mansubun. Mansubun. And mansubun, literally, it means fixed. So, whenever you see an ismun, a noun in Arabic, that has a fatha on the end, then that state will be known as mansubun. And the third and final state is called majrurun. Majrurun. So whenever you see an ismun with a kasra on the end, or two, as in this instance, then its state is known as majrurun. Now the beauty of Arabic is that, or rather the study of grammar, is that it's not just some theoretical or abstract concept that has no reality, or no connection to reality. Rather, marfu'un itself, it means raised. And if you can imagine, we have a line running through our word, then we can see that the vowel has been raised above that line. Hence, it is referred to as marfu'un. Similarly, the word mansubun, that means fixed. So if we imagine our line, then we can consider that the vowel has been fixed on the line. And majrurun, which literally means dragged down, then if we imagine our line, then it's been dragged down below that line. Hence the term majrurun. And it's been dragged down because this letter, fi, which is from huruful jar, the letters that drag down, or a preposition in English, has acted upon it and dragged the vowel down. Now these three states, marfu'un, mansubun and majrurun, are important to remember. And the reason being, because in our lessons that shall follow, inshallah, and indeed in this one, whenever I refer to a noun, an ismun, being in a particular state, for example, if I say that an ismun, such as kitabun, is marfu'un, then you know that that particular ismun has a dhamma on the end, or two. I will explain why it can have one or two. So marfu'un is associated with a dhamma on the end. Similarly, if I say that an ismun is mansubun, then know that it has a fatha on the end and it's being acted upon, usually but not always, by a verb. And if I say that an ismun is majrurun, then you know that it's being acted upon by, for example, a harfu jar, but there are a number of other instances where an ismun would become majrurun. These three states are very important to remember in order that you can recognize and associate the ending or the vowel marking with the name. So we have kitabun is marfu'un, kitaban is mansubun, and kitabin is majrurun. All of them, as I said, still mean a book. Kitabun is a book. Kataba kitaban is he wrote a book. And fi kitabin is in a book. What if we want to express the in Arabic? There is no word the in Arabic, but what we do have is something called al, or the lam tarif. The lam here that makes the ismun known. And the lam of ta'rif, or the al, can only be applied to an ismun. So you cannot apply it to a verb, nor can you apply it to a preposition, a harfu jar. Now, and this is very important, that when you add al to an ismun, such as kitabun, you remove one of the two vowels. So it becomes al-kitabu, the book. So we've moved from a book to the book by the removal of one of the vowels. However, the state is still known to be marfu'un. And the reason why the state is still known to be marfu'un is because, as I said, it's associated with a dhamma. That state is associated with the dhamma. So long as the ismun has a dhammah on the end, then its state will be known as a marfu'un. It's just that now with the introduction of al, we've changed the meaning from a book to the book. Similarly, the word kataba, or the sentence kataba kitaban, if we introduce the al here, make some room here. If we introduce al, what will happen to the ending on the ba? It will follow the same rule, and that is that we take away one of the two fathas and it becomes al-kitaba or kataba al-kitaba, and the meaning changes from he wrote a book to he wrote the book. But its state has not changed, because its state mansubun is related to the vowel ending, which is still a fatha. So that is marfu' and mansubun still in their respective states with the introduction of al. Our third and final state, which is majrurun fi kitabin, if we introduce al, because remember the meaning at the moment is fi kitabin, if we introduce al here, then the meaning becomes fi al-kitabi, because we remove one of the two kasras, just as with the introduction of al on al-kitabu and al on al-kitaba, we have al-kitabi with the removal of one of the two kasras, and the meaning changes from in a book to in the book, but the state is still majrurun. Now, as we said at the beginning of this lesson, this principle or this concept that an ismun in Arabic can be in one of three states is what tends to confuse the majority of learners or beginners, because it's unlike the English language. In the English language, interestingly, there is a state called marfu'un, it's called nominative, and there is a state called mansubun, it's called accusative, and there is a state called majrurun, genitive. But even though they have these descriptions, the pronunciation or its writing is still the same. So in English, whether I say a book or he wrote a book or in a book, the word itself, book, is pronounced and written in the same fashion. But in Arabic, as you can see, it changes. And in addition to that, the meaning of the state represents the vowel marking. Once we, or the student, can understand this concept, then the remainder of Arabic grammar actually becomes quite straightforward. And the reason being is because the remainder of Arabic grammar, all that it does is introduce further reasons or causes for the word becoming mansubun and for the word becoming majrurun. Of course, there are certain aspects that do become more complicated, but nevertheless, they will all still relate back to this principle of what effect has it had upon the word. In this instance, we're talking about asma'un, or nouns, singular ismun, but nevertheless, the state of a fi'lun, such as kataba, that can change too, but not in the past tense as it is here. But nevertheless, at the moment we're talking about nouns, and we introduced kitabun. We then described how it can be in three different states, and we gave them each a specific name. Then we introduced the al to move from a book to the book, explaining that the state stays the same in each instance. And that is what we wanted to speak about in our first lesson. Now, in the lessons that follow, bi'idhnillahi ta'ala, we'll further elaborate on all of these different aspects. But we wanted to introduce this first in order that it prepares you for what follows. And as I said at the beginning, that once you've understood this concept, then inshallah what follows should be quite straightforward. Now, this will be a series of lessons that we'll upload, inshallah ta'ala. So if anybody has any question or comment, then you can do so in the comment section below. And also, to conclude and to complete this lesson, I have developed an app both available for the Android and the iPhone. And I based that app upon something that wasn't already available, and that is the manipulation of the endings of words in order that you can understand and practically alter the ending to give a different meaning to the word. Now, those apps are available, and I think that they are useful, and I'm not only saying that because I developed them, but they're useful because they will complement these lessons, and they'll give you an opportunity to do exercises and to practice what you've heard and inshallah understood during the course of these lessons. So there'll be a link below, so feel free to download and try that. But on that point we'll conclude, because we do want to make these lessons quite short in order that you can digest the information, and if not that, you can go back to the beginning and play it again. So jazakumullahu khairan for watching and listening, and we hope inshallah to see you again with our lessons. La ilaha illa anta astaghfiruka wa atubu ilayk.